The silent movement. The dust storms of Voris 7 howled like forgotten souls across the barren landscape, sweeping between the abandoned habitation domes that dotted the outpost's perimeter. Once a thriving scientific research station, Voris 7 now housed only ghosts and a single living being who might as well have been one. Zerel Nemera sat motionless beside the curved window of her shelter, watching the copper-colored particles dance across the plains. Her luminescent violet eyes reflected the storm's chaotic patterns, tracking their movements with the precision of someone who remembered what it meant to move with purpose. The pale blue markings that spiraled across her shoulders and down her arms, characteristic of her species, the Altarians, seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light, the only indication that she was anything more than a statue. 15 years had passed since the Meridian conflict had ended, since the bomb had detonated in the Grand Assembly on Altaris Prime during the peace negotiations. 15 years since she had felt the ground beneath her feet, the rhythm of dance in her legs, the flow of movement that had once defined her existence. The communication panel on her wall beeped, an unusual interruption to the silence she had cultivated. Zerel's slender fingers hovered over the acceptance button, hesitating before pressing it. Habitation Unit 17, this is Interstellar Rehabilitation Assessment Division. A clinical voice filled the room. A representative has been assigned to evaluate your support systems. Arrival scheduled for tomorrow, 0800 hours. Zerel didn't respond. The Terran Alliance sent these notifications periodically, though no one had actually visited in nearly a decade. After the initial rush of humanitarian aid following the conflict, interest in outlying cases like hers had waned. Those who refused standard Terran prosthetics, who insisted on maintaining their cultural integrity rather than accepting the utilitarian replacements, were classified as non-compliant and gradually forgotten. She turned back to the window. Beyond the dust, the twin moons of Voris were rising, casting pale silver light across the desolation. On nights like these, she would drag herself to the central chamber of her dome, where she had created a sanctuary of sorts. There, suspended from nearly invisible filaments, hung hundreds of crystalline shapes, each etched with the patterns of dances she once performed, movements she had translated from memory into three-dimensional form. They caught the moonlight, scattering it in patterns across the floor, an echo of the ceremonial dances that had once been her life's purpose. The dances of the Altarians weren't mere entertainment, they were living history, sacred communication, the embodiment of collective memory. To dance was to connect with ancestors, to preserve knowledge, to heal community wounds. Without dancers, Altarian society lost its continuity, its spiritual coherence. After the bombing, standard Terran prosthetics had been offered, but they moved according to human biomechanics, efficient but utterly incapable of the fluid, spiral movement central to Altarian expression. So Zerel had chosen silence instead. Silence and memory. The sound of an approaching transport vessel broke through her thoughts the next morning. Precisely at 0800, as promised. Unusual punctuality for a bureaucratic visit. She didn't move to greet the visitor, instead remaining by her workbench where shards of translucent crystal lay scattered beside etching tools. Her lower body, supported by a crude mobility frame that she rarely used, remained still beneath a woven covering. The airlock hissed, and footsteps echoed through the circular hallway, steady, purposeful, not the hesitant steps of an administrator who expected to file a report and leave. Rehabilitation Specialist Kessler, announced a deep voice as a figure appeared in the doorway. "May I enter?" Zerel looked up, her face impassive. The human was tall, with broad shoulders and features weathered by more than just age. His hair was the color of iron, cropped close to his skull, and a faint scar traced a line from his left temple to the corner of his jaw. His eyes, however, were what caught her attention, gray-green and watchful, carrying something that looked suspiciously like respect. "You've already entered," she observed, her voice low and melodic despite years of disuse. The man inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Dr. Rowan Kessler. I'm here to assess your support systems." "My support systems are adequate," Zerel said, turning back to her work. "You've traveled a long way for nothing." Instead of being deterred, Kessler stepped further into the room, his gaze taking in the sparse furnishings, the self-sustaining systems, the workbench. Then his eyes fell on a small crystalline structure near her hands, an intricate representation of an Alterian in mid-spiral, one leg extended, arms flowing in counterpoint. "You're a Vesher dancer," he said quietly. "Not a question." Zarel's hand stilled. Few humans knew of the Vesher tradition, the most sacred of Alterian dance forms. "I was." The bombing at the Grand Assembly, Kessler continued, setting down his case. "You were there as a cultural representative. Why are you here, Dr. Kessler?" Zarel asked, her violet eyes narrowing. "The division hasn't sent an actual person in years, just drones and automated reports." Kessler didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved to the window, gazing out at the dust-swept landscape. "I requested this assignment specifically." "Why?" He turned to face her. "Because I've spent the last 8 years developing neural adaptive prosthetics that respond to species-specific movement patterns rather than imposing standardized locomotion." Zarel felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a flicker of interest, quickly suppressed. "The Alliance has attempted similar projects before. They all failed." "They failed because they were trying to make Alterians move like humans," Kessler said. "I'm trying to create prosthetics that remember how Alterians are meant to move." "And why would you care about that?" Her tone was skeptical, but not dismissive. Kessler's expression shifted, something complicated passing behind his eyes. "I was part of the early prosthetics program after the conflict. Standard issue, one-size-fits-all approach. Efficiency over identity." He paused. "I saw what it did to non-human recipients. Saw how it erased cultural expression, turned movement into mere function." He moved closer, stopping at a respectful distance. "I left the program when they refused to consider adaptive designs. Been working independently since." Zarel studied him, searching for deception, for the condescending pity she'd seen in other human faces. She found neither. "May I see them?" Kessler asked, gesturing toward the central chamber visible through the archway. "Your crystalline dance notations. I've only read about them in research papers." Zarel hesitated, then nodded once. She reached for the mobility frame beside her, a rudimentary device that allowed her to drag herself short distances. Kessler made no move to help, understanding instinctively that unwanted assistance would be an insult. The central chamber was a revelation. Hundreds of crystal formations hung from the domed ceiling, each capturing a moment of dance, a position, a flow of energy. In the morning light, they cast prismatic patterns across the floor and walls, a ghost ballet performed by light itself. "The remembering," Zarel said softly as they entered. "Each piece is a fragment of a dance that tells our history, our science, our spiritual understanding." Kessler stood motionless, absorbing the spectacle. "And without dancers who can perform these movements, the knowledge begins to fade," Zarel finished. "Already, the younger generation born after the conflict knows only what they've seen in recordings. The living tradition is dying." "Show me," Kessler said suddenly. When she looked at him questioningly, he clarified, "Show me how they're meant to move. Not with your body, but with words, with these crystals." For the next several hours, Zarel guided him through the chamber, explaining the significance of different formations, the spiral patterns that characterized Alterian movement, the connection between certain motions and cosmic phenomena they represented. Kessler listened intently, occasionally making notes on a small device, asking questions that revealed a surprising depth of knowledge about biomechanics and neural pathways. As the day waned, casting longer shadows through the dome, Kessler finally spoke of his purpose. "I've developed a prototype," he said. "Prosthetics with neural interfaces that learn from existing movement patterns in the recipient's body memory, rather than imposing pre-programmed motions." Zarel, exhausted from the longest period of interaction she'd experienced in years, regarded him warily. "And you need test subjects." "I need collaborators," he corrected. People who understand that movement is identity, not just function. He hesitated. I won't pretend this isn't experimental. But it's built on a fundamentally different premise than what you were offered before. Why me? She asked. There are others who lost limbs in the conflict, others who would be less difficult. Kessler's eyes met hers directly. Because your work here, he gestured at the crystal formations, shows that you haven't given up on movement, just on the tools you were offered to achieve it. He reached into his case and removed a small device, placing it on the low table between them. This is a neural mapper. Non-invasive. It reads the residual signals your brain still sends to limbs that are no longer responsive. If you're willing, it could help me understand your specific movement patterns. Zarel stared at the device, memories flooding back of other humans with other promises, other failures. I don't need your pity, Dr. Kessler. Good, he replied calmly. Because I'm not offering it. I'm offering a partnership. Your knowledge of Alterian movement, my engineering skills. He stood, preparing to leave. Think about it. I'll return tomorrow. I haven't agreed to anything, Zarel reminded him. Kessler paused at the entrance to the chamber, silhouetted against the fading light. No, he acknowledged. But you let me see this, he gestured at the crystal formations, and that tells me you haven't completely given up on the possibility of dancing again. After he left, Zarel remained in the chamber as darkness fell, watching the moonlight play through her crystal notations, casting ghost dances on the walls. For the first time in 15 years, she allowed herself to remember not just what had been lost, but what it had felt like to move with purpose, with meaning, with joy. The neural mapper sat untouched on the table, both a promise and a threat. To hope was dangerous, it opened doors to disappointment, to renewed grief. But as the twin moons of Voris climbed higher in the night sky, Zarel found herself reaching toward the device, her fingers hovering just above its surface, trembling with the weight of possibility. Dancing with ghosts. Morning arrived with unusual clarity on Voris 7, the dust storms temporarily settled into eerie stillness. Zarel awoke to find the neural mapper no longer on the table where Kessler had left it, but beside her sleeping pallet, her own hand resting upon it. She had moved it in the night, a decision made in that liminal space between wakefulness and dreams. The device remained inactive. She had not yet activated it, not yet committed to the possibility it represented. Trust came slowly after 15 years of isolation, of being a footnote in rehabilitation reports, of existing as a problem that no one had managed to solve. Kessler arrived precisely at 0800 again, this time carrying a larger case. His eyes immediately noted the relocated mapper, but he made no comment, setting his burden down carefully by the entrance. You've thought about it, he said simply. I've considered it, Zarel corrected, her luminescent eyes watching him with measured caution. I have questions first. Kessler nodded, taking a seat only after she gestured permission. I'd be concerned if you didn't. What happens if it fails? She asked, her voice steady. If your adaptive prosthetics can't interpret Alterian neural patterns after all. Then I learn from the failure and try again, he answered without hesitation. This isn't a one-attempt project for me. Zarel's gaze sharpened. And how long before you're reassigned? Before the division decides I'm not worth the resources. A shadow crossed Kessler's face. I'm not with the division anymore, he admitted. Not officially. I requested this assignment as my final act before resigning. This revelation hung in the air between them, unexpected and significant. Why would you leave the security of the Alliance? Because they wanted weaponized versions of my technology. His voice hardened. Neural interfaces that could be remotely deactivated, or worse, controlled, in case of future conflicts. Understanding dawned in Zarel's eyes. The implications were clear, prosthetics that could be turned against their wearers, bodies made into potential hostages during political tensions. So this is personal for you, she observed. A redemption project. Kessler didn't flinch from the accusation. Partly, he acknowledged. But it's also about finishing what I started before they could corrupt it. Creating technology that truly serves its users, not those who might want to control them. Zarel considered this, then asked her final question. Why haven't you activated the mapper? You could have done so while I slept. Because consent matters, Kessler said simply. Especially after everything your people have endured. A silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but weighted with decision. Finally, Zarel reached for the neural mapper, her slender fingers curling around its smooth surface. Show me how it works, she said. For the next several days, Kessler remained at the outpost, working with a focused intensity that matched Zarel's own disciplined nature. The neural mapper collected data about the phantom signals her brain still sent to limbs that no longer responded, capturing the unique patterns of Altairian neural architecture. Zarel found herself speaking more than she had in years, explaining the philosophies behind different dance forms, the spiral mathematics that governed Vesher movements, the synchronization with planetary rotations that had made Altairian dance both art and astronomical calculation. On the fourth morning, as pale sunlight filtered through the dome, Kessler sat across from her at the workbench, his face serious. I need to know exactly what happened, he said quietly. The medical records from after the bombing are incomplete. The nature of your injury matters for the interface design. Zarel stiffened, memories surging unwelcome and vivid. The official records say shrapnel damage to the spinal column. Irreparable with standard techniques. But that's not the whole truth, Kessler stated, not a question but a certainty. She looked away, toward the crystalline formations that caught the light. No. In the silence that followed, she made a decision. Trust, like movement, had to begin somewhere. The bomb contained neurotoxins targeted specifically at Altairian neural pathways. It was a weapon designed not just to kill, but to erase. Kessler's expression darkened with understanding. To destroy the dancers and the knowledge they carried. Zarel nodded once. I survived because I was further from the blast, but the toxin damaged the neural pathways to my lower body. Standard human prosthetics couldn't interface with our neural architecture even before the damage. After, it was deemed impossible. They told you it was permanent, Kessler said, his voice low with controlled anger. That you should accept limited mobility and be grateful. They didn't understand what they were asking me to accept, Zarel replied. Not just immobility, but the death of knowledge, of tradition. Of identity. Kessler was silent for a long moment. Then he opened the larger case he had brought on his first visit, revealing components unlike any prosthetics Zarel had seen before. The structure was elegant, with articulation points that curved and spiraled rather than bent at standard angles. The neural interface was a delicate web of luminescent filaments, reminiscent of Altairian biocircuitry. This is designed to work with damaged neural pathways, he explained, his hands moving over the components with reverent precision. It doesn't just bypass the damage, it creates new connections, learning from the patterns that remain in your upper body, extrapolating what the lower body signals would have been. Zarel's eyes widened slightly. You've been working on this for years. Since I first read the classified reports about the neurotoxin, he confirmed. The Alliance buried that information, called it a conventional explosive to avoid accusations of biowarfare. But some of us in the medical division saw the data. She studied the prosthetics with new understanding. And you've designed this specifically for Altairian physiology. For Vesher dance. For you, Kessler corrected. Based on your neural patterns, your specific damage, your movement history as captured in these. He gestured toward the crystal formations. Zarel felt something stir within her, not quite hope, not yet, but its precursor, possibility. Her fingers reached out, hovering above the gleaming surface of what would become her new legs. How soon, she asked, her voice barely audible. We can begin integration today, if you're ready, Kessler said. But the neural adaptation will take time. Days, perhaps weeks. I've waited 15 years, Zarel replied. I can be patient a little longer. The integration process was demanding, requiring precision and trust from both of them. Kessler worked with methodical care, explaining each step as he connected the interface to her damaged neural pathways. Zarel remained conscious throughout, her discipline allowing her to provide feedback as new connections formed, as forgotten sensations flickered at the edges of her awareness. By nightfall, the physical integration was complete. The prosthetics attached seamlessly to her body, their design echoing the natural lines of Alterian physiology. But the neural connections were just beginning to establish themselves, like tentative roots seeking soil after a long drought. "Now we wait," Kessler said, his voice gentle with exhaustion. "The system needs time to learn your patterns, to build pathways around the damaged areas." Zarel nodded, looking down at the new limbs that were not yet truly hers. "What if the authorities come looking for you?" "For these?" She gestured at the prosthetics. "They will, eventually," Kessler acknowledged. "I took classified technology when I left. But Voris 7 isn't even on their priority list. We have time." That night, as Kessler slept in the adjacent chamber, Zarel remained awake, watching the twin moons track across the sky. She could feel the prosthetics learning, subtle tingles and phantom sensations as the neural web mapped itself to her mind. Not just function, but feeling, the beginnings of proprioception, of temperature, of pressure, of presence. Over the next 7 days, progress came in small, precious increments. First the ability to flex what felt like toes, then to rotate ankles, to bend knees. Each achievement was hard-won, requiring concentration and patience. Kessler remained constantly attentive, making minute adjustments to the interface, encouraging without pushing. On the 8th day, Zarel stood. It wasn't graceful, not yet. Her balance was uncertain, the movements halting. But she stood on her own, without support, feeling the floor beneath feet that were both hers and not hers, synthetic yet increasingly responsive to her thoughts. Kessler stood nearby, close enough to catch her if needed, far enough to allow her this moment of triumph. His face showed professional satisfaction, but his eyes revealed something deeper, the vindication of years of work, of believing when others had dismissed the possibility. "Try a simple weight transfer," he suggested quietly. "Nothing complex yet." Zarel closed her eyes, remembering the most basic movement taught to Alterian children, the echo step, a gentle shifting from one foot to the other, rhythmic as breathing. She focused, sending the thought pattern that had once been automatic. And her body responded. The movement was small, imperfect, but unmistakable, the beginning of dance. A tear slipped down her cheek, luminescent like her eyes, catching the light as it fell. "That's enough for today," Kessler said, recognizing the emotional and physical toll of the milestone. "Rest now." But the next morning, an alert broke the silence of the outpost, proximity sensors indicating an approaching vessel. Kessler's face hardened as he checked the signature. "Alliance Security Division," he said grimly. "They found us sooner than I expected." Zarel felt fear rise within her, not for herself, but for the fragile new capability she had only begun to reclaim. "They'll take the prosthetics." "Yes," Kessler confirmed, already moving to gather essentials. "And arrest me for theft of military technology." "We have to leave," Zarel said, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. After 15 years of isolation, the thought of departure should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like the only possible choice. Kessler looked at her, assessing. "Can you walk far enough?" Zarel forced herself to stand, steadier than the day before but still uncertain. "I can try. And you can help me if I falter." The admission of potential need was itself a kind of victory over pride. They moved quickly, gathering only what was essential, medical supplies, the neural calibration tools, enough food for several days. Kessler accessed the outpost's secondary systems, triggering an environmental alert that would force the Alliance vessel to dock at the main station 2 kilometers away rather than directly at Zarel's dome. "There's an old research tunnel that connects to the geothermal vents beyond the western ridge," Zarel said, recalling the outpost's original layout. Abandoned years ago, but it should still be intact. Together they made their way through the service corridors of the dome, every step for Zarel both a challenge and a miracle. When her balance faltered, Kessler's hand was there, steady and strong. When doubt clouded her mind, disrupting the neural connection, his voice guided her back to focus. They reached the tunnel entrance as the distant sound of the Alliance vessels landing echoed across the plains. The passage was dark, illuminated only by the portable light Kessler carried and the faint bioluminescence of Zarel's eyes and markings. "Where does this lead?" Kessler asked as they descended into the tunnel's cool darkness. "To the old colony at Vorus Ridge," Zarel replied. "Abandoned officially, but there are still some inhabitants, researchers who chose to stay, other refugees from various conflicts. People who live outside Alliance jurisdiction. People who might shelter us," Kessler understood. The journey was arduous, testing the limits of the new prosthetics and Zarel's endurance. Yet with each step, the neural connection strengthened, the movements becoming more fluid, more natural. By the time they emerged from the tunnel into the fading light of dusk, Zarel was walking with growing confidence, her steps beginning to find the rhythmic quality that had once defined her. The Vorus Ridge colony was tucked into the cliffside, its structures blending with the natural rock formations, invisible to orbital scans. Lights glowed from scattered windows, signs of life in this supposedly deserted outpost. As they approached, figures emerged to meet them, a mix of species, including several Altarians whose eyes widened at the sight of Zarel walking. "A Vesher dancer," one of them whispered, recognizing the distinctive markings that identified her tradition. "Not yet," Zarel answered, her voice stronger than it had been in years. "But perhaps again, someday." They were welcomed into the hidden community, offered shelter and security. Word spread quickly of the human who had defied the Alliance to help restore what had been taken, and of the dancer who had refused to accept the silence forced upon her. 3 months later, under the light of the twin moons, in a chamber carved from the living rock of Vorus Ridge, Zarel performed her first complete dance since the bombing. Her movements were not yet perfect, still learning, still healing. But they were true, spiral patterns that told of survival, of memory preserved, of knowledge that refused to be erased. Kessler watched from the edge of the chamber, his face reflecting quiet satisfaction. The prosthetics moved as part of her now, responding to her thoughts with increasing fluidity. They would continue to improve, to learn, to adapt as she reclaimed more of her art. "Is it what you hoped for?" Zarel asked him later, as they stood on the ridge overlooking the distant, abandoned outpost she had called home for 15 years. Kessler considered the question, his eyes on the horizon where the first light of dawn was breaking. "It's better," he said finally. "Because it's not an ending. It's a continuation." Zarel understood. This wasn't just about walking again, or even about dancing. It was about defying those who had tried to erase a culture, about preserving knowledge that deserved to survive, about two people from different worlds choosing to trust when all evidence suggested caution. "The Vesher have a saying," she told him, her voice melodic in the morning air. "Movement is memory made visible." She turned to face him fully. "Thank you for helping me remember." As the sun rose over Vorus 7, casting long shadows across the ridgeline, Zarel began to dance again, not a performance now, but a private expression, a celebration of reclaimed possibility. Her movements traced patterns against the brightening sky, telling a story without words, of loss and perseverance, of silence and renewal, of a journey that had only just begun. And somewhere in the heart of the hidden colony, crystals waited to capture these new movements, these new memories, a living record of what it meant to fall, to be abandoned, and to rise again.